and welcome to the Cyber Thoughts podcast, where we explore the areas of cybersecurity through leaders in the field. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce my good friend Mike Privette from Return on Security. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Lucas. Hey, thanks for having me back.
Thanks for joining us. So, for those who haven't seen the first episode, give us a quick overview of what you do, and then I'll talk quickly about what I do, and then we're going to launch into just a discussion.
Yeah. So my full-time day job now is I run Return on Security. It's a one part data and kind of researching business, and one part fractional CISO consulting. So I use the CISO consulting to meet with a bunch of different companies in different stages and help them through like setting up security programs, most often as their first security hire. And then I use Return on Security to just kind of scratch my itch on anything around the cybersecurity funding market, the M&A industry, economics broadly, and how like cybersecurity impacts investors and founders and practitioners, all kind of in this like three-legged stool thing I like to call. And so then I just kind of riff off of each other and have this interesting conglomeration of interest that I do every day.
Nice. And so, for those who don't know, I'm with Lytical Ventures. We're an early stage fund focused on cybersecurity and AI. And today, Mike and I are just going to have a talk about kind of what we do in the market, as opposed to more of an interview style, which is what I often do. So I thought we'd kind of do a review of August. And one of the big things that happened is we all went to hacker summer camps at DEF CON and Black Hat. And so I thought I'd start out with, what did you think of Black Hat this year as kind of the big industry or one of the big industry conferences?
I thought it was pretty good. It was. I'm going to say this, and it may make some people cringe a bit, but it's getting a bit more like RSA, but like in the good ways. I think it was like more representative of just purely a hacker in a hoodie kind of style. So I think a lot more people were there. I think this might have been the year they had the largest attendance, but it's not so overly commercial and overly done the way some conferences can be. And so I think everyone seemed to have a really good energy. Everybody was really excited about it. And so I think it was a good year.
Yeah, so I get to be on the steering committee for some of the stuff and some of the talks, and so I got to hear kind of the recap from the firm itself, from Informa, and yeah, they were really happy with attendance was up. They launched a few new events, so a few new summits. So there's always been like the CISO summit, but this year they added the Innovator Summit and an AI summit, and those seem to be really well attended. And I'll use this to launch back into you. You got to do a panel at the Innovator Summit. How'd that go? What did you talk about in your panel?
Yeah, no, the panel was great. I wasn't exactly sure, what the kind of mix of the day would be like, but it was a really good mix overall of just founders and investors and builders in general, and there's people who were kind of interested in that side of the cybersecurity market. But I thought the micro conference was really nice. I definitely want to go again. Hope you guys run it again. But the talk was good. At least the feedback I got was good. I felt like it was okay. The panel I was on, I tried to make it, knowing that we were the last panel before everybody went to go get drinks, was tricky. So I'm like, all right, I've got to manage that carefully and not to go over time. But I also
What was your subject matter?
It was more just like industry trends. So like what's coming around the corner. What now that we're 2 quarters through the year, and plus a little extra. Like what are we seeing? What trends are emerging, and then what's coming next? What's kind of the focus of that panel? You can't do that without talking about AI. So that was like a big piece of it too. But then I'll try to make it also kind of like interactive too, with not only the panelists but a little bit of the audience as well. But I thought it was a good representative between all three panelists. You had Katie from 1011 Ventures, we had John Sakota from Decibel, and then Ross Halliuk. So we had a like good mixture of people who have kind of been in and around all those sides, and I think it went well.
Anything that surprised you from it, or was there any one or two takeaways that you think we should share with the group?
I think it was interesting to hear, like, obviously AI is such on top of mind, but it's interesting to hear people, try to like not go past that. Like, yes, we expect there to be like continual iteration here, but it was interesting to see like, well, this is just like one set of tools that can help us with our job. But like, So that I kind of felt there'd be a bit more, bleeding edge kind of like thought on that. But I know it's hard when there's such, AI overload, like information
Yeah.
overload.
I mean, yeah, there's a whole different AI summit, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
which is
and
great.
my
I think it needs to happen.
yeah, no, my understanding was the AI summit sold out almost immediately. Like it was
Yeah,
just one of those like, you know, which is unsurprising, I guess, given the zeitgeist, but still pretty
yeah.
funny that like, people can't get enough of it.
Yeah, you can't ignore it. And there's so many different variations and flavors of it today. And like you've got some really cool advanced research coming out. I think, to be fair, most of it flies like right over my head, but it's interesting to see just how much energy there is like going into it, and into this like little, like it's not little, but this like part of the industry. And then, it was awesome to see George Kurtz in the morning. Everybody wanted to know like at the CrowdStrike outage, like, how you doing, man? That's pretty good.
I gave him credit for showing up on stage because
Yeah.
like it's not a time when you wanted to. But
No.
with that said, I don't think he gave anything other than the pre-written, bad things happen to all of us and aw shucks. Again, I give him credit for showing up on stage, but it was a pretty friendly um, set of questioning on that.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I agree that like, they've done probably as best a job as they can respond to this, like knowing just how bad it was, and knowing that it's everything what they say or don't say, or write or don't write will be combed over with a very fine legal comb. And like, so I think, there's still probably a lot of fallout to happen from that if it goes to Congress and whatnot. But I think, it was good to see people kind of like support him, lift it up, as opposed to like, some of his competitors were trying to like, kick him while he was down. Like, well, our architecture would never do that kind of thing.
Right, right. Yeah,
Um,
our code's perfect.
yeah, exactly. So which, the community sees that. They're like, all right, we know a snake oil salesperson when we see one, with that kind of stuff. So like, people don't forget that kind of stuff. But no, it was good overall, and I think it was. I think a lot of people wish that they was like double the attendance, honestly, for that conference, just because more people wanted to be in on it.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm going to use this as a chance to switch over and talk about the trends, right? Because you're clearly an expert on it. You write about it every week. For those who don't know, Return on Security is must read. It's awesome. You got great data, and then when you do your deep dives and insights, that's awesome as well. But like a weekly, just here's what happened. So let's do August. What did August look like? Was it up? Was it down? And then how does it compare to summers past? I guess.
Yeah. So August this year was a pretty good month still, to be honest. We jumped back up over 1 billion again in funding, which uh, over the course of the year, like more months have hit over $1 billion in funding in cybersecurity than not, which
Wow.
sounds like a no-brainer. But like if you remember in 2023, like that didn't happen. But then if you remember even further back, 2022 and 2021, like it was normal to have $2 to $3 billion months. So like there was that big cliff that everybody fell off of when interest rates skyrocketed, and and everyone felt the economic crunch that really slowed a bunch of investing down, not just cyber, but like worldwide across all industries. So there's definitely been like pockets of rebounds this year in cyber on the funding. There's a lot more late stage funding than years past, which is like kind of like I always view that as like a healthy sign, because when like the later stage companies are still raising money and still making acquisitions, like you can tell that those later stage companies are still finding customers, and they're still finding creative ways to make sales. And that kind of just helps like replicate, or it helps like perpetuate more people entering into the field, trying to upstage them, trying to helps create innovation like where it doesn't exist today. And so like it's like a healthy kind of like churning of the industry. And when you don't see that happening, like we saw last year as much, that's when you're like, oh man, how many of these companies are going to shut their doors, or how many of them are actually going to make it to like 2025 or things like that, without a lifeline from private equity or something like that. Um, but it's been good, like overall. Yeah, even if it's trending down slightly, like the year itself is still trending less than last year right now on a couple fronts. but it's still been a strong year. I think August is there's typically some it's kind of like the calm before the storm. Like there's a bunch that ramps up early in the year, especially as and I know a lot of this is just news timing, but people kind of wait for RSA and for Black Hat to make big announcements and big splashes because like they can ride the wave of the news cycles then. And so you see a lot of like kind of a concentration there, but uh, and then it tapers off a bit in September when everybody goes to Burning Man and whatever. But then like they come back in VC summer and they come and then things start ramping up again. But it's it's no surprise that AI is still really hot. I think we just last week there was the third AI security acquisition this year, which is like incredibly fast given how quickly that this category or like set of categories has evolved. So it's definitely really fast moving, and I think it's a positive sign. Yeah.
So, any notable mergers and acquisitions that you want to talk about? And there's at least one I want to put on, which is Lacework. I think
Yeah.
gotta talk about that one. But yeah, what have we seen? And then let's talk about Lacework.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been obviously like services based businesses are still predominantly most of what acquisitions are in an industry. Like I know people really look at like large companies buying other large companies or like large companies like Darktrace getting taken private by private equity, and yeah, those are like big and they're exciting and they have giant price tags on them, which is cool, or like at least makes good for good news. But that's not even half of what makes up the industry in terms of acquisitions. It's usually one services business buying another services business, and which is the VCs don't like services business because revenue is lumpy and unpredictable and doesn't have good multiples and all that. But if you want to make money, you should start a service business and get acquired by another service business. So it all depends on like what kind of return you're looking for, and so it's that's just been an interesting clip. Like Ross and I did a post about like kind of the last couple years to date on acquisitions, and it's like 60 to 70% are services business. But then outside of the services, there's always really interesting ones. Data security posture management is always still really interesting, and still just like it's one of those things that like there will always be point solutions getting bought by much bigger ones. Like everybody's trying to build a platform, basically. At least a lot of these later stage companies are. But you got to talk about like Lacework. Obviously, that was a big one. Like, I'd love to hear your take on that one.
Well, so Lacework is or was a unicorn that got bought for, I forget the number, but 250 million, maybe a little north of that, maybe a little south of that. I forget the exact
Yeah,
number. Um, and they just took in $1 billion of financing earlier in the year. So my first take was a bunch of it was giving money back to their investors, right? Like, hey,
mm,
we'll give you 800 million of the billion we took in, and then we'll sell it for $200 million, and so maybe you
yeah,
get your money back on that round. But yeah, that's waving a pretty big white flag when you've got money in the bank and you're still going to sell for a fraction of your last valuation.
yeah. I mean, like I think at some of the lowest points, it was like a 98% haircut, which is like there's just no way that like you can't make that sound good in any way.
No,
Uh, and it was like also from an unlikely source, I think. Like I think a lot of people scratching their heads saying, why did they do that? Why did Fortinet do that? Because it just didn't seem to fit with any of the rest of the portfolio, which may be the reason why. But
yep.
also, uh, it's not like people were like we'll all of a sudden now think of them, and that when there's the gorilla of Wiz that's still there. So I think that was an interesting one. Like overall this year, there's been fewer acquisitions, like by like I don't know 25% or 30% fewer acquisitions
Okay.
year to date than last year. But the ones that have happened have been like higher profile, like that. Like they've either been higher profile good or higher profile not good. And so I think that's a kind of a that's kind of, what you're seeing is like that lull period where there wasn't a lot of money or there wasn't a lot of growth happening in the industry is now coming. Like, okay, now I've got my feet under me again as a business. Now I think I can make some strategic bets and or moves and like acquire some talent or acquire some tech or acquire some industries that I'm not like in fully now.
So yeah, that barbell effect to me feels like awesome and excellent businesses always, like, the top 10%, you can do whatever you want, good markets,
Mhm.
bad markets. And then the bottom, I don't know, let's say 20%, where nope, there's just no answer, right? Like you have to
Yeah.
sell. If you have a choice, you try to ride out a period like this one, it sounds like. Is that what it feels like there?
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. Like they're those who could just sat back and waited for like the right time, whether for them to get acquired or for them to make some acquisitions. And then others are like you just kind of, you run to the closest, you know, open arms, or you like close your doors, which you don't really hear a ton of that. Cause I think you can really like kind of bleed that out really slowly over several years. Which is not a good thing, but it does happen.
Yeah, no, we're just starting to see the rationalization, right? And Lacework is a big example of that, but there's a bunch of smaller examples. So you also
Yeah.
wrote an in-depth piece on, let me see if I get this right, AI and the shared responsibility model. And so I was hoping you
Yeah.
explained it to me because while I read it, I've got ideas and questions.
Yeah, no, it's honestly, I've been trying to study AI for a long time now, because it's like we're like anybody else in the security industry. You got to stay somewhat close to it to even understand what people are talking about now. All the research is coming out about it, but it's what has struck me about this, about what I've seen so far, is like I think we're on two separate like the people will talk about AI security in two separate and like very distinct constructs, and like you can see this by the types of startups that have emerged. Like on one end, you have, oh my gosh, you have to block Chat GPT and block Claude and all these things. Like we can't let people put sensitive data in there, put IP data, or put source code in there, because then all of a sudden our data will be out there in the training models and in the wild, and could be exposed, and we'll lose our competitive edge. And so a lot of startups started here to say, well, let's just block ChatGPT, or hey, let's redirect, let's sanitize ChatGPT before you get there, or let's make sure that you put a DLP in front of it, a better DLP in front of it. And I don't think any of those are wrong, but it was like kind of a knee jerk reaction. It was a legal and compliance CYA reaction, like oh my gosh, like we might lose like all this like private data. So they had to something had to emerge here to fix this and calm down legal and calm down the board, calm down CEOs, or all these people. And then at the very opposite end of the spectrum, you have here are super crazy and very mission impossible sounding red team AI models attacking other AI models to make them cough up their secrets. And we can do that, and or we can prevent your model from being like coughing up their secrets when you run your own model, which sounds really awesome, and I think it's needed. But like the number of companies that need this one are, pretty big. But the number of companies that need this one is like five, like
Right,
total.
right.
So
So the red teaming piece is a much smaller market than the compliance piece, is what you're saying.
it's small in the compliance, but it's way deeper. So like OpenAI and Claude or Anthropic will pay everything for that,
Right,
whereas these companies at the other end will not pay that much for it. And so there's not much in between. And most of the research that come out is really about like attacking foundational models, or attacking like or like securing like model deployment pipelines and like model data pipelines, and super advanced use cases that most companies don't have that problem. Like most
right.
companies do not have the level of funding, people, or time to roll all of this themselves. And so it's strange to me that there was such a disconnect between like this end and like the very very small end. And after going through like talking to many people and like reading a bunch of different publications and research pieces, and then going to different like kind of like trainings around, like nobody was actually like consistent in how they explained how the AI models work. Like how are you using AI matters wildly differently on like what you have to do to secure it. Like if I'm just using ChatGPT versus if I'm running, building my own like neural networks and running my own training platforms and all these things, and wildly different. And then I just thought there was no consistent way to do it. So I'm like, oh, I should probably make something simple that will help me explain to like somebody else like which model they're using, and then you can turn up the dials up or down based on where you're at. And that's kind of how the model was born in like at least version one of it anyway.
So yeah, I'm going to instead of use the word model, I'm going to use framework only because we're talking about AI models, so to make
Yeah.
it easier on our listeners. So what's the framework you're suggesting, and kind of how do you think people should implement it?
So I think you should think about it a bit like the cloud security shared responsibility model in terms of like breaking it down into like uh, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, or SaaS, but then like on-prem. But then I actually broke it out a bit more into like there's public SaaS AI, meaning like ChatGPT.com, you know, but then there's the private SaaS version of Chat if you get the Microsoft Enterprise Edition. So there's two differences between those. They still use some of the underlying foundational models from OpenAI, but there's governance on the enterprise one. I can tune what comes in and out. I can tune what leaves. I can tune who has access to it. I can't do that on the individual level. So like there's already an inherent risk reduction in using the enterprise version of that. But it was just like kind of helping people understand like figure out which deployment use case or framework you're using today, and then you can apply the security controls instead of jumping all the way to the end of like, do I need to red team my models that I don't actually have or run? Um, and so like that's what I kind of borrowed heavily from the cloud security model and like broke it up into like different components of like application security, model security itself, obviously like kind of traditional access controls, data privacy, data loss prevention, like compliance, monitoring, log, all those kinds of things, and of course incident response. But then overlaying like some of the new things about securing the model themselves or securing the data pipelines themselves, or like what sort of like ethical usage standards go into these things. Like some of it's soft, some of it's like tangible, but then some of it's like you have to like put forth like company guidance or like and like stances on how you will use these things, because it's kind of one of the few technologies that spans this like ethical implications. Like nobody says, is it ethical to use the cloud? Like like you just use it. You just launch it on AWS or Google and like there it is. But people do question because of like the unknown power of AI, known and unknown. And so you have to put some of these more like human effects on top of it, if that makes sense.
Nice. Yeah, totally.
It was fun to make. I got a lot of good feedback, and
For
so I'm hoping we can just keep building on it and iterating on it.
for people who want to find it, where does that live right now?
It's on returnonsecurity.com, and it's actually the number one featured post. So it's like the very first one if you scroll down on the left.
Cool.
Um, yeah.
All right. All right. So, kind of one last broad topic, and then we'll talk about startups a little bit, and then we'll let everyone get out of here. I wanted to talk about what I'm calling free speech fall. In that, in the last week or so, there's been a number of things in the free speech category. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll run them down really quickly. Love to get your thoughts, and we can just chat about them for a minute or three. So, first, you've got the, let's call it kerfuffle with X or Twitter being blocked in Brazil. And so, for those who don't know, a Brazilian judge is blocking X in Brazil because they wouldn't take down certain data. And then you've got the arrest of Pavel Durov, who's the founder of Telegram. So he landed his plane in France. He's Russian, I believe, and he landed his plane in France, and they picked him up. Um, uh, and that's an interesting, uh, you know, interesting case.
Yeah.
I think he's got 12. Is it 12 counts? Anyway, they've you know, um, and then last but not least, you have in the U.S. The Senate has just passed two privacy bills. Let me read these: the Kids Online Safety Act, which is KOSA, and the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act, which is COPA 2. And so these are again um, basically limits on free speech for people under the age of 18. So the teens one moves the COPA, which used to be 13 and under, up to 17 and makes a duty of care. And the Child Online Safety Act is for kids, obviously. So, you know, I think this is an interesting thing that's happening. So, like, what's your view on free speech versus safety and privacy? Pick any of the one of the three, go from there.
Yeah, man, this is a tricky topic too, and there's been so much that's happened all at once like this. And then like there was also a lot of stuff in the UK about there were riots in like the northern part of the UK, like that was propagated through online like misinformation, and people were misreporting it and caused like a bunch of violence and a bunch of destruction as well. It's really tricky, I think, because like where does the line start and stop on privacy, and where does the line start and stop on free speech? Yeah, honestly, I think this is a really tricky topic because it's hard to know like where is the line when free speech is like too free, and when's enough data privacy, like, or when is too much data privacy. And it's really fickle because if you'll let one thing slide, then a lot of people jump to assume like you'll either let many other things slide, or you'll, and then the opposite of that, like if you say you can't say this thing on social media in this country, I think it's good that they push back on that. Like I think that's tricky, but like of course not everybody around the world has free speech. Like I think that's
Right.
a it's something easy to forget, but it's not as it's a Western concept. It's not a global concept in all cases. Um, I think it should be a global concept, but that doesn't mean like I can just make it so. But
So I love it as a concept, but I'll also point out that free speech is, government repression, right? Not so. If we'll take Zuck, Zuck doesn't want to talk about, have Nazis on Facebook. Completely his free speech right because he owns the platform, right?
yeah,
Um, so there's two different pieces there, because people often conflate free speech with, well, this is the internet's, I don't know, what is it, the internet's central meeting place, and
right,
therefore, they have to let everything through, which is what
yeah.
4chan does.
Yeah, and I don't, and I think that's tricky too because there's some stuff that clearly causes violence and it clearly causes like hate and racism, and like I don't think that has a place anywhere. Um, and that's, the old adage is like freedom of speech does not mean freedom of consequences. And a lot of this stuff, and I think that's you're seeing that some of that play out. And then even with Pavel's is or Telegram is it's very tricky because like his platform facilitated lots of these things, and the argument was that, well, you didn't help the policing agencies thwart any of that. Like you didn't help at all in any way like combat any of the known terrorism, the known illicit drugs, and content and other kinds of like payments that were happening on the platform or activity. So it's that one's trickier because it's like truly hands off and no censorship whatsoever. But
So
I think it's hard to everyone's line's gonna be personally different on that one, which is the hard part.
So I invested in a secure messaging platform. We invested in Wicker, and it got bought
Oh
by
yeah,
Amazon. But the beginning of every board meeting, which was fascinating to me, we started out with, "Here's the lawsuits against us right now," right? And here's the number of like requests we've got from the government, and so on and so forth. Because you know, if you've got an end-to-end encrypted platform, you're gonna have bad actors using it for
yeah,
drugs, pornography, all those things. And so, we had to have it very well. If we get a court order for this, we're going to turn it over. Da, da. And so,
yeah,
in Telegram's case, yeah, he just wasn't playing that game, right? Like, and, okay, you're a Russian citizen. Technically, you don't have to follow the laws of France when you're not in
that's right,
France.
yeah,
But he landed in France, right? And so, this is goes same thing with Elon, right? Yeah, you know what? You don't have to listen to the Brazilian government,
right,
but if you don't, they're within their right to take down your service, much like we're talking about getting rid of TikTok in the United States, right? Like, if
yeah.
we feel it's propaganda, yeah, hit it up.
Yeah, exactly, and true. And like governments are not always like they don't act as rational people. Like they can do different things. They can say, "Oh, we'll just seize your stuff. Like we can just take this from you. Like we can seize your assets. We can seize your money, uh, and they can tie it up long enough that like a regular individual can't do that." And so it's always tricky, finding that line between like what is enough versus too much, because especially, and it's hard to talk about this stuff without being dipping into politics, but like you may be okay with it if you align with the politics on the side of that today. You may be wholly against it tomorrow if the politics flip and now it's against you as the one who used to be for that. So I think it's like kind of wise not to take like super hard stances on those because
Yep.
like it can flip against you at any moment.
I forgot who it was, but somebody tweeted or wrote, it's really tough being an independent free speech advocate because you lose half your team each election cycle, right?
Yeah, yeah,
People go like, oh, well, now I'm fine with it, right? Like, it's my guy who
yeah,
wants to curb it. It must be a good idea.
yeah.
Um,
That's right. Yeah, I'm with this side now.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so last one, let's do it quickly. Any areas you're particularly interested in? Did you see any companies at summer camp that you thought, that's a standout? And listen, this is also your chance if there's anything AI related you want to say that you haven't said in the, you know, AI, you have to talk about AI, right? So,
You have to talk about AI. Yeah. Um, I'm excited for like this kind of next wave of AI security companies that are like, but not focused on securing AI, but in fact, like AI for security. And so the ones that are, and I'm ready for the next wave of like getting past like the AI SOC agent or the autonomous SOC analyst who's like correlating events for you. I think those are good. That's a good like kind of needed iteration of things. I think there's probably like 20 or 30 companies all doing something very similar in that space now. So we're definitely in like a micro bubble there. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's like it's time to go to like the next wave. Like, all right, what's going to actually make a difference, and like what's going to give context? Is that I think it's got a lot of power. AI in general has a lot of power to help provide like super effective decision making if you can give it the right sets of context and data at the right time, or at least allow the humans to make a lot better decision making. So like I'm excited for that. And I was talking to a few companies who were kind of dancing in and around that space at Black Hat. And I think there's AppSec. People keep trying. That's like kind of the quickest path to that, and where like AI is also shining as well because it's code is just text, and so there's ways you can like really evaluate that. But you know, I'm really hoping that we can kind of elevate third party risk management as well. Like it doesn't sound very exciting, but these like point in time one off questionnaires with stale questions and stale answers, and like this game that's really about legal CYA. I think it's pointless outside of like contracts. And so, but if you really want to manage your third parties, and I think monitor their like the health or performance over time to really monitor your supply chain and like have a good idea. Like I think there's huge opportunity for that space. Um, and so I think there are people who are trying to solve it, but I don't know how close anyone is yet. But what about you?
so, I had an answer just 2 seconds ago, and then you asked. What I am most interested in right now is building on the high ground, right? So I've got this thesis that we keep building our castles in the middle of the swamp, right? The first one sank in the swamp, and then we built a second one, and it fell over and sank in the swamp.
Mm,
So we keep building on the low ground, and as like why is every port open by default, right? And that's
yeah, yeah,
changed. But like that's the easiest example is like when we used to attach the internet, you're like, I'm available to everybody and every port's open. And
right.
so we've gotten slightly better at that. But still, if you put up a website, the entire world can come to your door. And let's
Right.
be honest, I don't know, there's probably 6 billion people that you really actually are never going to serve. And so why can they access it at all, right? Like, no,
Mm,
only people in the United States can get to my website because I'm a
right.
small business owner in Detroit, right? Like, done. Just, you know. And so the idea that we can do better. So I gave pedantic examples, but some good examples like, hey, let's build everything in Rust, right?
Mm,
Like we could get rid of an entire class of error of
yeah,
buffer
yeah,
overflow. Let's just get rid of those. Um, but that's really hard to do, right? Like, no, we've
right.
got 30, 40, 50 years of legacy stuff. And so how do you convert that? So I think that's really interesting. And people are having different ways of attacking it. But the idea of, hey, let's build on the high ground. Let's stop doing we've done for, 30 years now.
Yeah,
Let's try something different and new because what we're doing is clearly just not working. So that's
yeah,
what I'm most focused on. But I can't point like a simple space because it's not, no, you need that in networking. You need that in
yeah.
code review. You need
Everywhere.
it everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so
No,
that's my thesis. Yeah, go ahead.
no, because I think we've kind of just, as an industry, always focused on the exact opposite end, where it's like we just need better detection and response. We just need better. In fact, like everybody's agentless, and like actually, it'd be better if we had an agent and agentless, and so then we have another set of like the industry has just kind of evolved over the years to be just like here's a view of like some loosely coupled things, and like but let's put another view on top of that to make a better view of all the bad data below, and then like it just keeps extrapolating upward and upward, which I think is like some of that's needed, but it's definitely not like you can't keep doing that. Like, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
You have to change like foundational things.
Yep. Cool, man. So remind everyone, where can people find you?
ReturnalSecurity.com is the main place where I do all my writing and my weekly newsletter. Or always on LinkedIn or as Mike Privette or Twitter Mike P Security. I made that name like a long time ago and it just stuck. But
Love it.
yeah,
Well, thank you for joining me. And obviously, people can find us here.
yes,
Have a great weekend. It was wonderful talking to you, man. Be
yeah.
good.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.